Hello, everyone. My name is Arjun.Rakheja. I'm a high school student at Poolesville High School in Montgomery County, Maryland. And this summer, I interned under Mr. Tim Edwards and worked on automatically creating digital symbol libraries. And the purpose of this project was to take a Liberty file from the Google Skywater process design kit and parse through it and automatically create a digital symbol library. And the first step I did in this project was to create the standard set of cells. Um, and in this KiCad window, you can see many different types of cells that I drew out. And this library was used to compare to cells that were gathered through the parsing of the Liberty file. And my Liberty file parser was written in Python. So this is what my parser was. My first function is my parser function. It's my main function. Basically, I obtain whatever file the user wants to use, and then I call all the different functions. So the first function I coded was the get cell names, and this function takes a Liberty file and it scans for all the different cells names, and it also creates another list called cell divisions. What cell divisions is the index in the Liberty file by line of the Liberty file where each cell's information ends and begins. So then in later functions, when I'm looking for information, I can scan through each section, which will give me information each cell when I correlate it later. And then the get function names, it returns a list of function names for each cell. And the tricky part about this function was that cells have multiple functions. So what I did is that this the list being returned is each element is a list. So if the first cell in the Liberty file has two functions, that means the first element in this list will be a list with two elements, and those elements will be the function names. And if the second cell only has one function, this second element in in the return list function names, it will still be a list, but only have one element. And get footprint, this function simply gets the footprint, and it's very similar to the get functions procedure, except that the cells will only have one footprint. And get sequential is a procedure I wrote that gathers information if the cell is a flip-flop. So it gathers all this information over here, and it appends it to a list and it returns it. So if the cell is not sequential, so if the first cell is sequential, the first element in the sequential cells list contains all the information in order. And then, but if the second cell, for example, is not sequential, an empty list is the second element of sequential cells. And then the get latch does the same thing as get sequential, except this is for latches. And then get pins returns the pin names. And this procedure was especially tricky because I had to use cell divisions. So divisions this time. So, and this cell is the make cells. So the important thing about this procedure is that it returns a cell dictionary where the key is a cell name and the values is all the information. And in my previous procedures, all my information was in order. So like the first element of each of the function, footprint, sequential, and latch and pin list, the first element is the corresponding information for the first element in the Liberty file. And the second element for each of these is the corresponding information for the second cell in the Liberty file. So it's easy to correlate. And then map cells is where I use another text file called gate_list, and this text file contains cell names like and, or, and to, or to, different latches, and it contains information where I look through it and see what information is common. So for non-sequential, it was pretty simple. I just looked at the function. And then for latches and flip-flops, I developed a naming system instead of scanning through the text file. So for the latches and functions, I looked at if they had specific information, and then I would add specific letters. For example, if there were two functions in outputted, I mean not two, two pins outputted from a latch or flip-flop, the letter Q would be added to the base name. So like the base name for the flip-flop was DFF. And then the make library file, I use the KiCad sim file of the standard cell library that I created. And then I scan through it looking for the same information that I gathered from my parse through Liberty file. And then I took the cell that was found. So let's say we found an AND2 cell. So I scanned through the KiCad sim file for my standard set cell library. And then I found the information needed to draw AND2 gate in KiCad. And then I wrote those same lines into a new KiCad sim file for my Liberty file. And then so the example I'm going to show has 4 cells. It has an AND, an XOR, a flip-flop, and a latch. Okay, and now I'm going to exit out of KiCad. So this cell over here, this KiCad sim file, it contains information needed to draw an AND, an XOR, and a DFF flip-flop and a latch that was in my testing Liberty file. Usually Liberty files will have hundreds of cells, but I just use this Liberty file for testing. So then if we open KiCad, and we scroll down to test, you can see how these are now cells from the Liberty file, from this Google Skywalker PDK. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions. My email is arjun.rakheja@gmail.com, and thank you.